Okay. So now today what we are going to do is we already learned a couple of things around basics of GraphQL. Now today what we are going to do is we'll try to make a very simple end-to-end like a full stack GraphQL application. Okay. Um, what GraphQL is and what are the basic key concepts around GraphQL we already talked about in the last live lecture, right? I can give you a quick brief around GraphQL, but today's agenda is to make sure that we are able to make a very simple end-to-end full stack GraphQL application. We'll try to integrate a simple DB also. We'll try to make a simple to-do app, because once you know how exactly the protocol eventually works, or you can say the overall technology actually works, then you can make any complex application altogether. Like you can make an authentication out of it, you can make a dashboarding system out of it, anything you can actually build totally end to end. Okay, so that's going to be the overall agenda. Okay, so just to give you a quick brief around what GraphQL is, right? Let me share this screen and I'll say GraphQL. So you can say GraphQL is nothing but a API query language, right? We already talked about what is a API query language. You can say that in normal REST, you can have some resources, but there will be a lot of APIs that you might have to write. For example, let's say if there is users, there is to-dos. So you might have to write a different API to get users. You might have to write different API to get to-dos. You might have to write different API to get all the users and they're all the to-dos. Like you have to write a lot of APIs altogether. GraphQL actually avoids that. What GraphQL does is it provides us one single endpoint, and on that single endpoint what you can do is you can kind of like send an request object which is going to have the query for you, that what do you expect out of this particular operation, and then you are going to get a response back, right? We saw that applications like medium.com uses internally GraphQL, right? If let's say if I go here and if I go to inspect, if I go to network, and if I let's say just expand it, or let me move it here. Okay, if I just clear all of these things, come up here, you can see a couple of GraphQL requests are going up. All of these GraphQL requests are going to make sure that we actually hit the common GraphQL endpoint, and from that common GraphQL endpoint we can actually send this kind of an object. Make sense, everybody? Right? So today what we are going to do is we are going to try to make a simple to-do app, and let's see what can be actually done end to end on top of it. Got it? Anybody having any questions? Anybody having any questions around GraphQL? What is the expectation of today's session? Hi, Adrol. Okay. If you guys want to get more more details around GraphQL, I already mentioned that in the last lecture. You can go to this spec. GraphQL, whatever GraphQL actually provides, it's just a spec, right? Different implementations of GraphQL can exist. For example, we saw how exactly Apollo servers actually integrate GraphQL altogether, right? We also saw that. So these kind of things you can actually try and see that what are the different implementation, but this most of the implementation follow kind of like a common spec, and this common spec you can actually find here. You can go to the official documentation, and from there you can find this particular common spec. Make sense, everyone? Okay, cool. Let's start in that case. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a full end-to-end full stack application. I'll make a backend service. I'll make a front-end server. We are going to write everything end-to-end in TypeScript. So let's do that. So I'll make I would say, GraphQL to do. Okay. I'll go inside GraphQL to do. And I'll make two folders. One I will make as server, one I will make as client. So I'll say mkdir server, mkdir client. Okay. And what we're going to do is we will separately set up the server and we will separately set up the corresponding client. Okay. We'll separately set up both of them. So I'll go to CD server. Okay. And let me open this in VS Code. Okay. And let's do one more thing. in a new tab of my terminal, I'll go to GraphQL tutorial, GraphQL to do. I'll go to the client folder as well, and I'll open the client folder as well. For now, we will start with the server, and slowly and steadily, we'll try to add things to the corresponding client as well. Okay, cool. So I want to make a very simple to do, right? Every to do can have, let's say, a couple of title, like one single title, a couple of tags. We can have a completed property. These kinds of things we can have. Okay, cool. So let's start setting up the server first of all, so that we have an end-to-end GraphQL server working for us. Okay, and also we are going to make sure that we follow a proper project directory structure. We have different files for different use cases, so that we have a much cleaner code coming up in front of us. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to do is I'll say npm init -y. I'll create a brand new npm project so that we can start implementing our server. Now the first package that I would like to install is Apollo server, right? We also saw Apollo server previously, that how exactly Apollo server can work, right? So let's install Apollo server very quickly. You can also follow along because I'm going to one by one install all the dependencies. It can take up some time to install. If you want, you can code along as well. If you want, you can just watch me coding in front of you, and later you can just try out yourself. Okay. And apart from this, let's install GraphQL. Okay. We are going to install GraphQL, npm install GraphQL. You can see GraphQL is up with us. Now, one more thing that I would like to have is Mongoose. So I'll say I'll install Mongoose because I want to integrate a simple MongoDB database. So for that MongoDB database, I'm going to use a ODM. That is your Mongoose. If you don't know about Mongoose, you can just check it out on the internet, like what is ORMs and ODMs. Then I will also install TypeScript because I want to enable this project with TypeScript. You can see npm install TypeScript is there, and a couple of more things. One more thing that I will install is I'll say npm install @type/node. I'll install all the types for basic Node.js libraries, and I'll also install ts node dev. Okay, this is going to be kind of like your TypeScript nodes. Like this ts node dev will help us to run our TypeScript file. One more way can be you build your TypeScript file into a JavaScript file and then run that JavaScript file. But I don't want to do that much because that will deviate us from our, I would say, basic requirement. Okay, these are the packages that we have. If you go here, let me open the server here. If you go, you can see all of these dependencies we have. Okay, I'm not going to go too much into what to keep as dev dependency or not, because our main sole focus should be on setting up GraphQL altogether. Okay, cool. Now, one thing that we need to have here is a tsconfig.json. Okay, here we are going to configure most of the things around TypeScript. Okay, I'll just add compiler options. Okay, in the compiler options, I'll add the target property as ES6. Okay, then I'll add the module as common.js. Okay, you can get some commonly written tsconfig file for you as well if you want to get started very quickly. Okay, I'll add the strict mode to be true. Okay, and the output directory I'll add as /dist. Okay, and apart from this, I'll say skip libcheck. So I don't want to check the types on the libraries. Okay, and one more property we'll add. We'll say ES module interoperability. We'll say true, so that we can use ES moduling as well along with it. Okay, so these are the compiler options, and I would like to include what directories. I'll say source/anything inside source, and it's I would say internal directories we are going to include. Cool. So this is going to help us to set up a basic TS config for us. Make sense? Now, what we are going to do is we'll create a source folder. Inside the source folder, I'm going to create a new file, server.js, and I have kept a very basic project so that even if you do not have a lot of context around backend engineering, you can still understand, because we are just going to make CRUD APIs. You must have, let's say, if you are solely working on front end, let's say you are a front end guy and like you just do front end, you have no context about backend. Still on front end, you must have consumed some APIs, right? So these kind of APIs we are going to also write. Okay, cool. Now, this is going to be our main server file. Inside this main server file, what we have to do is we'll say import mongoose from mongoose. Okay. Now, what do we need? We need a MongoDB server, right? We need a database hosted either on our local machine or maybe somewhere on the cloud. So I'll do one thing. I'll take a cloud instance and set up MongoDB there. So let me bring up my cloud instance. One second. Okay. So you can open MongoDB Atlas. Just give me a minute. I'm bringing it on the screen. Let me sign in very quickly. Okay. Cool. So just a second. Okay. So I've created a new account. So this is the website of MongoDB Atlas. You can actually go to this MongoDB Atlas website. Okay, here you will be able to host a brand new, absolutely free MongoDB instance, right? So let's do that. So I've created a new account. I'll submit. And you can see the moment you create a new account, this kind of a screen you are going to get. So I'm creating a brand new account so that you also know that how to set up MongoDB end to end in case you have never done that on MongoDB Atlas. What's your primary goal? Our primary goal is to, let's say, learn MongoDB. And I would say more than a year. Okay. Which programming language? We are going to use mainly JavaScript. Okay. And I'll say customer user. I'll just add all of this. We can use it for anything. Okay. And you can say it's just microservices based architecture. I'll finish. This is just for their documentation purpose. And the moment you will sign up, you are going to get this kind of a screen, deploy your cluster. Now, MongoDB Atlas, what it helps you to do is it helps you to set up a MongoDB server on the cloud absolutely free. So you can see 512 MB of free storage we can get. And you, if you want, you can use AWS as the service behind the scenes, Google Cloud as the service behind the scenes, Azure as the service. Like it's kind of like a wrapper on top of all of this. So I'm going to go with AWS. You can select the region. I'll select the nearest region, Mumbai. Okay. And I'll say create deployment. Okay, cool. Now you can see it's going to ask us a couple of things. First of all, it is asking us to add a username and a password. Okay, so let's say I'll keep this same password. I'll just copy this password somewhere. Okay, let me copy this password somewhere. I'll just copy paste this password and I'll copy paste this username as well because you will need this username and password later. So just copy paste it somewhere for a moment. Okay, so this is, if you want, you can connect to the same instance, but make sure that after the lecture, I'm going to delete the instance. So you at some point of time, you might have to make your own. Okay, so you can see this username and password we need. Why do you need a username and password? Just like if at any point of time you might have connected to a MySQL server, you need to put a username and a password, right? Similar to that, to connect to this MongoDB instance, when we will try to initiate a connection, we need to pass a server, I would say username and password. This looks good. And let's click on choose connection. And before that, let's click on create database user. So what it will do is that username and password will be added as a database user. Now click on choose a connection method. So what we are going to do is we are going to connect with the drivers. So click on drivers. And what driver we need? We need the Node.js driver. And you don't need to follow the remaining steps. All you need is this URL. Just copy this URL from here. Okay. And now what we are going to do is, let's do one thing. I'll install a dependency .env so that we can have some environment variables. I'll create a new file .env. And here I will say db_URL and I'll paste the URL once again. Let's copy the URL again, copy and paste the URL. If you carefully see this URL, I'll maybe add it in a single quote. If you carefully see this URL, here it has already added our username and already added our password as well. Can you guys see? So this is the same username and password that we prepared. So now we do not need it here. So I'm removing the comments. Okay. What is this env for? This is to maintain your environment variables. I'll save it. This looks good. And I'll click on done. So now you can see your brand new database is ready. Now there is only one thing left. You need to actually add a couple of IP addresses so that you can access it from anywhere. Okay. So what you can actually do is, you can see everything, your sample data set and everything is successfully ready. All you have to do is, let's say, if you go to this part, network access, and you click on add IP address, okay, you can see there is an option allow access from anywhere. Just click on this and click on confirm. Now what will happen? You can also connect to this same database instance. If you will not do this step, then only I will be able to access this database instance, because it generally just adds your current IP address. But if I wanted to get access from anywhere across the internet, you need to do this step. How? Go to network access, click on add IP address, and just click on the top option of allow access from anywhere. It will add this kind of a section for you. And now your MongoDB cluster will be accessible from anywhere. Okay. If you want to access it, let's say if you go back to the database and if you click on connect, okay, now you can even connect it with MongoDB Compass. Click on this and you can click on this URL. I'll open MongoDB Compass. Let me open it. Generally, it takes a couple of minutes in my machine to open. Okay. Sure, Aditya, we can do that. Let's wait for it to open, guys. Let's wait. If you guys have any questions, currently nothing around GraphQL. I'm just setting up the database. Okay. Let's wait. Let's wait. It takes up some time, MongoDB Compass in my machine. Till that time, we can take up some questions. किसी का कोई सवाल कोई जवाब? अभी तक जो भी हमने करा सबको समझ में आ रहा है? इट्स अ प्रीटी स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड प्रोसेस. मतलब अगर तुम GraphQL पढ़ने आए हो तो कभी ना कभी तुमने डेटाबेस इंस्टेंस डेफिनेटली सेटअप किया होगा लोकल मशीन पे या फिर किसी क्लाउड इंस्टेंस पे. बट स्टिल, इन केस इफ एनीबॉडी हैज एनी डाउट्स, लेट मी नो. ठीक लग रहा है सबको? ठीक है. आई गेस दिस शुड बी ओपन. वन सेकंड. One second. Let me see why it's not opening up. Okay, I believe it will take a couple of more moments. Okay. Ask me later. And wait just a second, guys. Is it possible to make association between different databases? You can do that. You can make association, but you have to add a logical layer on top of it. Like you generally do these things by adding a server. For example, let's say you have a Node.js server. That server will be communicating with different databases, right? And whatever logical mapping you have to do, you will do that with Aditya. Right? It's not like it's not a recommended way to access one database from another database. Kind of like that. Soumyajit, I am having a blocker there. वहाँ पे एक वीडियो की ऑडियो में कुछ प्रॉब्लम आ गया. आई एम नॉट गेटिंग टाइम टू रिकॉर्ड द ऑडियो पार्ट. जैसे ही वो ब्लॉकर आएगा आई विल स्टार्ट. ब्लॉकर रिमूव हो जाए, मैं ट्राई करता हूँ नेक्स्ट वीक तक डाल दूँ. ठीक है. जैसे वो ब्लॉकर हट जाएगा देन विल बी एबल टू. कर सकते हो रोहन, डेफिनेटली तुम कर सकते हो. ठीक है. आई गेस MongoDB कंपास में कुछ तो प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है मेरे मशीन में. वन सेकंड, लेट मी रीस्टार्ट. वन सेकंड. Okay, let me restart MongoDB Compass. One second. ठीक है. Anybody else having any question? जब तक हम लोग कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. Let's see. अगर नहीं होगा स्टार्ट. वैसे हम लोग डायरेक्टली यहाँ से भी एक्सेस कर सकते हैं FIR. तुम यहाँ से भी डायरेक्टली ब्राउज कलेक्शन करके भी एक्सेस कर सकते हो. इन केस यू डोंट वांट टू यूज MongoDB Compass. ठीक है. तो एक काम करते हैं. इट इज टेकिंग सम टाइम. तो हम लोग डायरेक्टली यहीं से एक्सेस करने की कोशिश करते हैं. ठीक है. So MongoDB is kind of like taking a couple of minutes for in my machine to open. So what you can actually do is, if you go to your database and if you click on browse collections, right here you will be able to browse a couple of collections here and there. We can also add our own collection. You can see there is a lot of sample collection it has added. We don't want this. So you can just remove all the sample collections for now. So I'll drop the user collection. Okay. And I'll drop the comments collection. 1 second. So these are like sample collection that MongoDB Atlas actually adds. Okay. Let's delete embedded movies, copy, paste. Let's delete movies, copy, paste. Two more. I just want to keep a clean, I would say, database. Okay. Oh, now MongoDB Compass is turning up. Cool. Sessions, I'll remove sessions. And theaters. And in fact, what we can do, we can just clear the whole database and create a new database. We can even do that. So let's remove the whole database. Now, if you will open it, you will realize that there are no databases. Okay. I'll click on add my own data and let's keep a database name as to-do DB. Okay. To-do DB. Collection name I'll keep as to-dos and no preference as such. And I'll click on create. Okay. So this should be good. You can see now we have a to-dos DB with a to-dos collection. Okay. And you can see MongoDB Compass is also up. Now, if you want to connect with MongoDB Compass, what you can actually do is you can go back to database, click on connect, click on Compass and copy this URL. And just paste this URL here. 1 second. Let's copy it again. Copy, paste. And this password we need to replace. So we already have the password with us, right? Let's close this one. We already have the password with us. This is the password. Copy. And this is the password. And if you click on connect, now you can see we are able to connect with the MongoDB server directly from our Compass, right? Compass generally runs slightly slower on my machine. I'm not sure why, but okay. You can see if you go to this, you can see there is a to-do-DB database coming up, right? We just created it. And inside to-do-DB, if I will try to open it, you can see there is a to-dos collection. So our database is up and running. And now what we have to do is we have to start connecting with the Apollo server to create a GraphQL server and connect with this MongoDB instance altogether. Make sense, guys? So why we use ORMs and ODMs? What is the need? Why we cannot query directly? Querying directly is generally a heavy task because you have to remember a lot of queries. You might have to write some complex queries altogether. What you can actually do with ORMs and ODMs is you can have more object-oriented way to access things. Okay. Aditya, in that project, we are using the same database, but we are making one more project this time. There we will be using multiple databases. Okay, cool. Coming back. Now we have MongoDB up and running. Now let's try to connect MongoDB here. So I'll write a, let's say, function, start kind of like this. Okay. And inside this function, let's say, let's keep it an async function. First of all, what do I like to do is I would like to first of all connect to the MongoDB server. Okay. So I'll say await mongoose.connect. Okay. Now I need to get this server URL. How we will get this server URL? So what I can do is I can make a configuration layer. I'll create a new folder config. Inside that config, and one more thing, let's make it a TS file. One more thing, let's make it a TS file. Rename.ts. Okay. And inside config, I'll create a new file. I'll say server config.ts. Okay. And I'll say import.env from .env. Okay, if you don't know how to work with .env, just check the documentations. It's just to configure your environment variables. And I'll say export default port as process.env.port. Sorry, process.env.port. If it is not present, then we are going to return port as, let's say, 5000. And for now, we don't need port. Let's just do one thing. Let's just export the DB URL. DB URL as process.env.db underscore URL. Save it. And now here what we can do is we can say import server config from /config/server config. And here we will say server config.db URL. Okay, server config.db URL. And if this is not present, in case this is not present, I'll just pass an empty string for it. Okay. Save it. Now you can see this line, what this line is going to do, this line is going to help us to connect to the MongoDB database altogether. Okay. Now I want to specifically, now this is the whole server URL, right? This is the whole server URL. I want to specifically connect to the to-do DB. So I'll say to-do DB. Save it. And now here, let's say console.log connected to MongoDB. Connected to MongoDB. Save it. Let's try to run this code. I'll say node source/server.ts. And technically, we should not do directly node. We should say ts node. Okay. Oh, my bad. I have not called the start function. Let's call the start function. Save it. Right. So we need to call the start function here. Right. And let's do it again. And you can see we are successfully connected to MongoDB altogether. So MongoDB connection is up and running. Now all we have to do is start preparing a GraphQL server. Make sense, guys? Anybody having any questions? ठीक लग रहा है? Guys, is this point making sense? Okay, cool. Now, in the last part, we also discussed the fact that GraphQL server has two main properties. Its types and queries. And you can say query as well as mutations. So what we are going to do is, let's create a new folder. And I'll call it as type devs. Okay. And here, I'm going to create, let's say, a new file, index.js. Here we are going to write all the corresponding type definitions for us. Okay. So we'll say import GQL, GraphQL query language from Apollo server, right? Apollo server. Save it. Okay. And I'll say const type defs is equals to GraphQL query language. And in a backtick here, we are going to write the whole query. Okay. And we'll say export default type defs. Okay. Now let's start defining a couple of types. The first type that we want to define is to do. We want to define a to do type. Every to do is going to have an ID, which will be a ID property, or you can say the ID scalar from GraphQL. We can have a title of the to do, which is going to be a string scalar. Okay. We can have a completed property, which is going to be a Boolean. So there is a Boolean scalar as well. And I want tags. Okay. So what you can do is you can say there are a couple of tags, and tags are nothing but an array of string. And this array is always going to be present. Okay. So this is the type of the to do that we are going to have. As simple as that. Okay. And now what we are going to do is we are going to define a query, type query, because if you remember, query is also a kind of like a type only. And one query that we are going to define is get to do's. And what we should return here is we should return an array of to do. And this array can never be null. Okay. So this kind of a query we are going to define, as simple as that. Cool. So we have a type def almost ready with us. Now what do you need? You need resolvers. I'll create a new folder, resolvers. Okay. Inside resolvers, I'll say index.js, and let's start preparing a couple of resolvers. So I'll say const resolvers is equals to, first resolver is for the query. What is the query that we have? Get to dos. Get to dos is the first resolver that we have. Okay. So what we can do is we can write a async function here, or you can just say async, something like this. Okay. And what this is going to do is this is going to kind of like get all the to dos for us. Now, in a good project structure, resolver should be just calling your services. You should have a service layer where all of the business logic should be implemented. Okay. So ideally, what should happen is we should get a services here. Okay. And inside the service, I'll create a new file and I'll call it as to-do service.ts. Okay. I'll create a class to-do service. Okay. Inside the constructor of to-do service, what I'm going to do is we need repository as well. So we need a repository layer as well. Repository layer. What is the use case of a repository layer in a short form? Repository layer is responsible for querying the database. You do not query your databases from your controllers, from your resolvers, or your service layer. You always query the database from your repository layer. Why? Because then your code is properly segregated and it will be able to follow all the solid principles later as well. So I'll create a new file and I'll call it as to-do repository.ts. Okay. And here I'll create a class to-do repository. Cool. Now, apart from this, apart from the repository and services, we need the models as well. So I'll create a new folder, models, inside which we are going to define our to-do model. So I'll say to-do.js. Let's define our to-do model. So how do you define your to-do model? I'll say import mongoose from mongoose. Okay, and again, if you're a pure front-end guy and you don't understand much of the backend, don't worry. This is all we are setting up so that we can start consuming this service from a front-end. Okay, cool. Now here, what we have to do is we have to prepare a schema. We have to prepare a schema. So we'll say new mongoose.schema. You can say it will help you to define the outline of how the database should look like. I'll say title. What should be the type of the title? The type of the title should be string, right? And it is required as well. Required to true. Okay. This is the title. Apart from that, there will be a completed property, which will be of type Boolean, right? And this is also required. And the third is going to be tag. Third is going to be tag. And you can say the type of tag is going to be an array of string. Okay. And this is also going to be required to true. As simple as that. Okay. And this is going to help us to create a to-do schema. And using this to-do schema, we are going to create a to-do model. So I'll say const to-do is equals to new mongoose.model. Okay. And I'll pass to-do schema. And what should be the name of the model? Name of the model should be to-do. Okay. Name of the model should be to-do. Save it. And I'll say export default to-do. That's it. You can see we have a basic to-do model ready with us. If you just want to understand what is going on, so Mongoose give us a capability to define a schema. That is an outline of how the collection is going to look like. Collection is eventually your model here. So then once you have defined how the model should look like, you create the model by passing the schema and giving the model a name. And this model we are going to use inside our repositories altogether. Abhishek, that's a mistake. Make sense, guys? Okay. Now let's start writing our repository. So in the repository, I'll say constructor. Okay. This should get a to-do model. And I'll say this dot to-do model is equals to to-do model. Okay. And you can say the type of and let's do one thing. For now, let's keep it like this. Okay. And now we can have an async function. We can have an async function saying get all, right? What is the use case of this async function? This async function is going to actually help us to get all the to-dos, right? Okay. Now, what we have to do is with this to-do model, that we have created, we need to prepare a type as well. We need to correspondingly prepare a type as well. Okay. So let's try to do one thing. We will create a types folder here as well. I'll create a new folder, types, because we are using TypeScript, right? I'll say todo.js. Oh, sorry, not JS, todo.ts. Rename todo.ts. Okay. And now what we'll do is I'll say export default. We'll prepare, let's say, an interface I to do. Okay. Which is going to extend, I'll say mongoose dot document. And what's the type of the document? Title string and completed boolean and tags, which is of type array of string. Okay, this is your I to do interface altogether. Okay, and when you are going to create the to do model, we will say this is going to be of type I to do. Okay, let's import I to do. I'll say import I to do from type slash to do. Make sense? So now we have a type associated with our to do model as well. Very simple and straightforward TypeScript. Technically, you can say we are actually using it. Okay. Cool. Now inside the to do repository, we will say that this to do model is going to be of type I to do. Okay. And let's do one thing. I'll say to do model will define of type I to do. Okay. Here we go. Now we are going to write a get all function. Ideally, what this function should do is this function should simply say return await this dot to do model dot find all. Okay, this dot sorry, not find all. I guess there's a function find. Okay, this dot to do model dot find. Make sense, right? So inside MongoDB, or you can say Mongoose, actually gives us a find function, or you can say find by ID and update function, find by ID and delete function. All of these function it is going to give us. Can I say that? Everyone, say yes or no in the chat. Right? These are simple Mongoose function that it actually gives us. Got it? Okay. Now I'll add a couple of more functions. For example, I'll say async create. What this function should do is this function is going to take the title of the to do, title of type string, and then let's say tags of type string array, and let's say that's it. Okay. And what ideally this should help us to do is this should actually help us to create a brand new to do end to end altogether. Okay. Now what we should do is in all of these functions, we will say, let's say return await this dot to do model dot create, and even let's even do one thing. Instead of saying I to do here, let's make it slightly more simple. I'll just import the to do model, import to do from slash models slash one second, slash models. Okay, models doesn't have a to do. Oh, sorry, this is a TS. This should be a TS file. My bad, guys. This should be a TS file. Got it? Let's try again. Models slash to do. Okay, and let's do one thing. Let's directly use a to do instead of just creating this here. Okay, we can say to do dot find, to do dot find, and here we can say to do dot create. Okay, now to create a to do, what do you need? You need to pass the title, you need to pass the tags, and the completed property should be initially passed as false. This is something that you need to create a brand new to do. Can I say that, guys? As simple as that. Okay, and what should be the return type? What should be the return type here? The return type should be of promise of I to do, and this should be an array of I to do. Here the return type should be promise of I to do. Got it? Make sense, everybody? So this is how you can actually write your brand new to do repository. I'll say export default to do repository altogether. You can see, and we can keep on adding more methods like a delete method. We can add an update method. All of these things we can separately add on. Make sense, guys? A simple CRUD. It's a simple CRUD so that our main agenda of GraphQL stays intact. Say yes or no in the chat, guys. Are you able to get this point? Okay. So now, ideally, what we should do is, in creating the to-do service, right? Exactly here, right? What we should try to do is, we will say, let's say, let's get a service repository object. So I'll get a to-do repository, okay, which will be of type to-do repository, and I'll say this dot to-do repository is equals to do repository. Okay, because we need to have an object associated here, right? And I'll say to do repository of type to do repository coming up here. Save it. Okay. Now, similar kind of method we are going to have in the to do service as well. I'll say get all because it's a very simple project. So you can say the service layer and repository layer is going to just call each other. If it would have been a complex project, then this service layer will be having your business logic. Any kind of filtration, any kind of sanitization, let's say for to-dos you want to do, this is the right place to actually do that. And from here, I'll say return this dot to-do repository dot get all. Okay. And async create, we'll get a title and we'll get tags. Title is of type string. Okay. Tags is of type string array. One second. Tag is of type string array. And we'll say return this dot to the repository dot create. I'll pass the title and I'll pass the tags. You can see this is good with us, and we'll say export default to do service altogether. Make sense? So now we have a service layer with us. It's a simple initial setup. Now I would like to focus more on the corresponding mutations and queries. So let's come to the resolver query. So this is get to dos. Now ideally get to dos, what it should do is it should try to get all the to dos. Now in order to get all the to dos, what it needs to do is it needs to actually have a service layer object. So I'll say const to do service is equals to new. I'll get a to do service. Okay, what we are exporting from here, to do service, right? So, and let's make it a TS as well. Why I'm making all the JS files? Okay, new to do service, and in the constructor we'll pass an object of new to do repository. Okay, save it. And how do we get all the to dos? I will say return await on this dot to do service dot get all. Not sorry, not this. That's this position. Save it. Let's go to do service. And here also we should do await. We should await here as well. And we should await here as well. And in the repository, we are already awaiting. This is good. Now you can see I have written a query as well with me. What I'll do is I'll say export default resolvers. Okay. So now I have a query. I have a type def. Everything is good and up and running for me. Now I'll come back to my server.ts. Now what do I need to do here is I need to create a brand new, what do you say, Apollo server object. Also, let's do one thing. Let's rename this to TS. Okay. And let's do what's going on here. Oh, sorry. It should be only mongoose.model, I guess. Yeah, this one. You don't need to do new mongoose. It's just mongoose.model. Okay, coming back. Now, let's create an Apollo server object here. I'll say const server is equals to new Apollo server. The Apollo server takes what? Your type defs. So type def is going to come from type defs, and resolvers is going to come from the resolvers file altogether. Once you have this, what you can do is after the server is connected, you can say await server.listen, or you can just have a callback based method as well. Server.listen, right? And let's have await only. Await server.listen. And then we can say console.log GraphQL server is up. Okay. This should be good. Okay. And what you can do is it will give you a server URL. You can say in a backtick, GraphQL server is up on dollar URL. Save it. And if you come up and restart the server, okay, okay, this is a URL object, I guess. One second. I guess let's do a toString. Let's remove this URL. I guess they have changed the API. Let's see what is this listen returning. So, okay, it's a promise of server info. Let's go to server info, and from the server info I can get a URL. Okay, so let's do one thing. I'll say info, and this should be info.url. Info.url. Save it. Let's see. Okay, can you see our GraphQL server is up on port 4000 on my localhost. Let's go here, and you can see a brand new GraphQL server is up. If you click on query your server, then it's going to go to the sandbox environment. And can you see it is able to find our field, that is the query get to dos, and this is the type of the to do: completed, ID, tags, title. Everything is up and running, and we are able to set up a brand new TypeScript based GraphQL server with our, you can say, if I go to the resolver, with our query coming up here. As simple as that. Make sense, guys? We did a similar stuff in the last class, but just we did with JavaScript. This time we have done with TypeScript. Got it? Is this point making sense? Yeah, yes or no in the chat. Any questions, guys? Time for questions. We can take up a couple of questions now. Any questions from anyone? मतलब इतना जो पार्ट है हमने ऑलरेडी देख लिया था कि there is something called as query, there is something called as types that we have to define, and then we can actually put up the queries in place. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about something interesting. Now we can talk about something interesting. So apart from query, as I mentioned, there is one more very important concept that we call as mutation. So in your CRUD, you have create, read, update, delete, right? So the read part, whenever you are going to read something from the storage where you do not make any changes in the storage, GraphQL classifies that as a query. Rest everything, like if you want to create something, you want to update something, or you want to delete something, GraphQL classifies it as a mutation. Now, if you will, let's say, do a read in the mutation, it will fail. No, it's not going to fail. It's just a recommendation. Just like REST gives us recommendation, GraphQL also gives us recommendation that if you are making any side effects on the server, that should be classified as a mutation. If you are just reading something from the server, that should be just classified as a query. That is a simple difference between mutation and what do you say, query altogether. So you can say, just like inside your types, if I go to the type defs, just like query is also a type, similar to this, mutation is also a type. For example, you can say type mutation. So mutation is also a type, it's just that it's a defined type altogether. Okay, mutation is also a type. Now I can define a mutation, add to do. I can define a mutation, add to do. And once this mutation adds the to do, what it will return? It will return a to do object altogether. Now, an interesting part. Whatever query or mutation you define, do you remember you have to write a resolver for it? Here in the resolver, you have to write a resolver for it. Now, very smartly, if you see, get to do's was not having any arguments, but create to do will be having arguments. So how do you define arguments in your type definition? Just like how you define arguments in any function signature. You put a pair of parentheses, and now you can say title, which is of type non-nullable string, and tags, which is going to be of type array of string, which array is non-nullable. And that's it. This is how you define the signature of a mutation. Once you have defined the signature of a mutation, what you can actually do is you can actually come to this resolver here, and I can define resolver for a mutation. Separately, you have to define resolver for your mutations. And what's the first resolver? It's for add to do. It's for add to do. It's going to be an async function, and this function is going to take 3 parameters. You can for now avoid the first parameter altogether. You can avoid the first parameter altogether. The second parameter is the arguments that is coming up here. These arguments that is coming up here. So there is a title of type string, and there is tags of type string array, right? This is going to be your definition coming up altogether. Okay. And ideally, this is not how you define it in TypeScript. Like, just remove it from here, and I'll say title is of type string and tags is of type string array. As simple as that. Okay. So these are the 2 main arguments that you need to have. Okay. There is one more argument, but for now you don't need to care about that. Okay. And let's write the implementation for add to do. What should be the implementation of add to do? You should say return await to do service dot create. Okay. And here I'm going to pass a title, and I'm going to pass the tags. That's it. That's it. And you can see that's how you can define a mutation altogether. Okay. Let's see if there is any error coming up. There should be an error. Save it. And that's it. So you can say mutation is also a type of a query. Just what GraphQL recommends is that GraphQL recommends that mutation should always try to do some side effects on the server. That means it should be able to add something to the server, update something to the server, or delete from the server. That's it. That's a mutation for you. And now we will be able to call these mutations from our front end. How many of you are able to get this point? Say a yes or no in the chat. Everybody. Error handling will be done just like how error handling is done in any REST server. So don't worry on the error handling. Okay. Any questions, guys? Anywhere, any questions? So this much part you already saw. Mutations is new for us. So how do you go for mutations? Just if I give you a revision. So for the revision part, in mutation, what happens is you have a type called as mutation. In mutation, you can define any addition, deletion, or updations. So for example, I define a mutation add to do, which is going to return a to do. This mutation add to do will be given some arguments, that is title and tags. So you define these arguments just like in a pair of parentheses and give the types. Inside this resolvers, you define one more resolver type key, that is mutation key, and inside the object you give individual functions. Add to do. This is going to get a resolver function, and every resolver function has first argument that you can for now absolutely end-to-end avoid, right? The second argument is the parameters that are going to come from the front end, and from here you can see I just called the to-do service. Make sense, guys? Any questions? For example, if you connect GraphQL with REST server and all CRUD is written in REST, then do we need to write mutation in GraphQL? You are saying there is one microservice that is in GraphQL, one microservice is in REST. Is that correct, Abhishek? Okay, and then you say that REST server is calling the GraphQL server. So yes, so all the CRUDs apart from your read, the create, update, and delete is going to have a mutation side in the GraphQL. Got it? We are connecting GraphQL with REST endpoints? No. You will be connecting GraphQL endpoint with REST. No, because REST service is calling GraphQL. You said REST service is the caller service. That's what you said. Right? Okay, cool. Now let's try it out, guys. Let's try it out. How about that? Now, if you want to try it out, let's restart the server. You can see the server is up, and now I'll remove all of this. Okay. Now here I will type a mutation. What is the name of the mutation? Okay. So let's say adding some to-dos. Okay. And which mutation we want to actually call? Add to-do mutation we want to actually call. And can you see it is adding a couple of types here and there, right? It is automatically adding a couple of types here and there. So let's do one thing. Let's not have all of this. I'll say add to-do. Okay. Now, what's the argument? There is a title argument. So let's say I want to add a to-do. Let's call it as to-do 1. Okay. And there is a tags. So let's say tags is grocery and let's say homework. These are the two tags. And in the response, let me shrink this up. In the response, what do we want? Let's say we want the ID of the to-do, right? We want the title of the to-do. We want completed property of the to-do. And what do we need? Let's say we need the tags. Let's send this. If I execute it, can you see? It has technically created a to-do for us. We are getting this ID. And can you see it's a MongoDB ID? If I come back to my database and browse collections, if I go to to-dos, you can see we're able to browse all the corresponding collections. Can I say that? And this is the new to-do that has been created. Okay. And if I call it as to-do 2, for example, if I create one more to-do 2, and let's remove the grocery tag, send it, you can see a brand new to-do has been created. Now, if you want to query, let's say fetch, okay, and what query do you want to say? Let's say get to-dos, and I want to get all the properties of to-do, completed, ID, title, and tags. Okay. And let's say let's execute the fetch. Let's execute the fetch, send it. Can you see we are able to get all the corresponding to-dos now? If you do not want the tags of the to-dos, let's remove it, send, and you can see we are getting tags of to-dos. We are getting all the to-dos without the tag. That's the best part, right? If you do not want the completed property of the to-do, you can remove that, and you will just get this much part from the to-dos. That's the beauty of GraphQL coming up. Okay. Now, apart from this, there is one more property that you can add, that is type name. Let's see what happens. If you send the type name, then whatever object you are fetching, it will also tell you the type of that object. What is the type of the object to do? So this property comes up with every single GraphQL query that you want to send. And with every response, you can actually access the type name object. This is a very useful property that you can actually use later. Make sense, guys? So we are able to add to-dos and everything. And you can see there is no REST API call coming up. Any questions? Any questions? I'll push this much. I'll push this code. So git init, git add all. Oh, my bad. Let's make a git ignore. So we have a git ignore, node modules. Now let's do a git init, git add all, git commit, and let's make a new repo. GraphQL to do. GraphQL to do. Create. Copy. Paste. Let's check out master and push to master. Here we go. So you can go to this URL. You can go to this URL and you'll be able to find all the server-side implementation that we have done as well. I've shared the link of this in the chat. Make sense, guys? So now we have a GraphQL server ready with us, where we have one query and one mutation, which is successfully working for us. Can I say that? So what if we also implemented JWT in it and only authorized can access? Then the queries we need should check in middleware. Does GraphQL also provide inbuilt functionalities for that? So GraphQL doesn't know anything about middlewares. Why? Because GraphQL, you can say, is a spec, right? GraphQL is a spec. It has nothing to do with middlewares. It has nothing to do with rest of the stuff. Can I say that? GraphQL will not care about that. Why will GraphQL care about that? You want to have a, for example, middleware infrastructure. It's a spec. It's a specification. Just like REST doesn't know anything about middlewares, right? Does REST know about middlewares? No. REST doesn't know about middlewares. Can I say that? Right? Guys, do you think REST knows about middlewares? No. REST doesn't know about middlewares. Are you able to get this point? Okay. So for that thing, like what you can do is for every incoming request, because if you carefully remember, from the client side, we are going to make what? We are going to make one, I would say, endpoint call. We will just make one endpoint call. Can I say that? In that endpoint call, you can change the query and fetch the response. So in that one endpoint call, in the header, you can send the authorization token. And there is something called as context here. There is something called as context inside Apollo server. Through that context, you can actually access the headers, and then whatever you return in that context, that context is available to all the resolvers. So did you remember I mentioned about the third argument? So the third argument comes up as a context. We have not discussed yet about the first argument. Second argument are your parameters. Third argument is your context. Are you able to get this point? Okay, so read about context. Or maybe I can just show you a sample implementation. Make sense? That needs to be passed to every query? Yes, because that's how authentication works, right? Abhishek, that's how authentication works. Even if you make a REST API, you have to pass the JWT token with every API call. Can I say that? Okay, cool. Now we have a GraphQL server with us ready. Now, what if you want to prepare a client? Now, as of now, most of the time, whenever you prepare a React project, 99% of the time, what you might be doing was, what you might be just making an API call to a REST API. You might not have ever made an API call to a GraphQL server. That is what we are now going to do. Okay. So I'll come to the client. and here I'll say npx create React app. Okay, we can use create React app, we can use white, whatever you want. Okay, and let's say I'll call it as GraphQL client. Okay, and I'll keep the template as TypeScript. I'll keep the template as TypeScript. Okay, let's create a brand new React app for us. Okay, it's a simple command using which you can make a React based project, which will have your React dominant. Okay, but it's just similar, like just like how from a React project you make a REST API call through packages like Exaios, or you can make a fetch call. Here, Apollo, just like Apollo gives us a server, Apollo also gives us a client. From that client, you can make a REST API call, very much similar to how you are making a call from here. Very much similar, these kind of calls you will be able to make. So let me show you that how you can use GraphQL on the front end. Okay, so let's wait for it for a moment. Any questions till now, guys? You can ask me any question. Like if you want to have any random question, also if you want to ask, just shoot me up. We'll be happy to answer. Anyone with any questions? Or no questions? Nobody has any questions? सबको समझ में आ रहा है? Cool. You can see the project is up and running. Just a second. Cool. So now we have successfully set up our brand new client. Okay, right? Abhishek is asking, sir, can we store authentication token in cookies? So ideally, you should store the auth tokens like JWT in your HTTP only cookies only. You can store it in local storage or maybe session storage as well. Some applications do that, but a very good way would be to use HTTP only cookies. So let's clear it out. I'll go inside GraphQL client. I'll open this in VS Code. Let's close this one. Okay, GraphQL client. And now we have to install a couple of packages. The first package on the React app also we will install is GraphQL. We need the GraphQL package here as well. Okay, and we need a package called as Apollo client. Apollo/client. Oh, sorry, my bad. Okay, so it will fetch the client implementation for the Apollo server so that we can very easily connect to the Apollo servers. Aditya Singh said, does the project is included in backend course of communication between multiple ways? The project is included in backend course of communication. I didn't get your question. Aditya, are you asking that in the backend course, are we doing connection with multiple databases? So in the latest one, yes, we are. Cool. So you can see this package is also up and running. Okay. And now, if you want to get your application up and running, a very simple command, we can just do npm start, right? So I'll say npm start, and it should be triggering our brand new React app. Okay. So you can see here. Just a second. You can see a brand new React app is up and running. See, a brand new React app is up and running. Okay. Now let's start making changes to this React app so that it is able to make GraphQL API calls altogether. Okay. Now, inside my source, you can see we have a lot of things. So I'll remove a couple of things. For example, I'll remove this test, go to trash, and I'll remove this test as well. Go to trash for now. I'll remove all the CSS. I don't need any CSS at all. Okay. And inside app.tsx, I can remove everything. And I can just say GraphQL to do. GraphQL. Okay, save it. Okay, something is happening here. Why it's not saved? Yep, now it's saved. Let's remove these two. Save it here. Okay, cool. Now what we're going to do is inside the source, I'm going to create a new folder. Okay, I'll say config. Inside config, I'll create a new file and I will call it as Apollo client.ts. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to create an Apollo client instance. In this Apollo client instance, what you do is you try to give the URL for your Apollo server, right? And it will automatically connect to your Apollo server. Okay, how do you do that? So you can say import create. There is a method called as create HTTP link. Why? Because if you remember in the Medium application also that I showed you, it was making an HTTP call on medium.com/GraphQL. If you remember, if you go to Medium and if I go inspect, one second, let's close MongoDB Compass. We don't need it as of now. Let's inspect. And let's do one thing. Let's go to network. Now, can you see? It is making a GraphQL call. But technically, it's an HTTP call only. Medium.com/GraphQL. So first of all, it will because your GraphQL server just exposes one endpoint. So you have to make an HTTP call to that endpoint and pass your payload. Then GraphQL libraries will automatically convert this payload to the corresponding GraphQL query. Now, how do you create this HTTP connection? Using this create HTTP link. So you say const link is equals to create HTTP link. And here you have to pass your URL. What's the URL of our backend server? It is http://localhost 4000 /GraphQL. Okay, so GraphQL automatically gives us this endpoint /GraphQL. You can make a call to this endpoint /GraphQL and it will automatically make a bridge between your client and the corresponding server. Now, once you have this link object, now you can create a client instance saying new Apollo client. So there is an Apollo client object inside which you have to pass the link. You pass this link, and there is a property called as cache. Okay, so you can say new in memory cache. Now, what is this cache and what is this link and what is this client? Let me clarify this. Okay, I'll just quickly do a export default client. Now let's see what's happening. So first of all, you have to create an HTTP link object. This link object has the details of on what URL you want to make the HTTP connection. Now, when you create this new Apollo client, what it is going to do is it's going to create a brand new HTTP connection on this particular link. So you pass this link object. Okay. The second object that you pass is a cache. So what is this cache? So this Apollo client actually helps us to cache requests as well, right? If you are making repetitive calls to the same instance and you're getting similar output, then it has capability to automatically cache your request. Okay, so there is a very interesting concept that exists with GraphQL. Okay, that is very frequently used. We sometimes call it as optimistic UI. What is optimistic UI? Let me tell you. For example, let's say there is something like Twitter. In Twitter, you liked a post. The moment you like a post, what happens is there is a network call that goes to the servers of Twitter. Okay, there will be a network call that will go to the server of Twitter. Now, how the like UI should work is there are two scenarios. One, you like the post, network call goes, creates an entry of the like that this user has liked this post, give a response back from the server, and then the heart will actually go to the red color. Okay, if you see, or you can see a same thing in like Medium as well. For example, you can see in Medium something similar to like is something called as claps. Okay, if I go up, here you can hit a clap. The moment I hit a clap, now there is one way to implement this clap feature. That is, the moment I click on this icon, first a network call should go. update the database on the backend that this user has clapped on this particular article, give us a response that there is a clap successfully created, and then I update the UI making this icon darker. There is one more concept called as optimistic UI. What is optimistic UI? In optimistic UI, you say that 99% of the time this particular feature is going to work. So what I'm going to do is the moment the user clicks this clap, I'll immediately update the UI as a darker clap, and parallelly I will make a API call. If the API call succeeds, then the UI is already updated. UI didn't wait for the server call to come back. And in case something went wrong and on the server side we got a wrong response back, then we are going to re-update this UI altogether. So that's what we call as optimistic UI. In optimistic UI, you assume that probably this is going to work. So let's update the UI immediately, and parallelly the backend interaction can work. In case something failed, then we are going to revert things. So this cache actually helps us to also implement that optimistic UI, because you are going to update the things in your cache, and in case the server response is not what you expected, then you have to update this cache also. So this cache helps you to do performance optimization for an Apollo client and a server, and this is kind of like a very important part of the overall architecture. So you can see this is the client that we have, and now what we are going to do is we are going to use this client to make some GraphQL API calls on site our server. I hope all of this point is actually making sense to you. Say yes or no in the chat, guys. So you can read more about optimistic UI. Optimistic UI. Okay. You can see the first one is coming in Apollo GraphQL docs. Optimistic UI is a pattern that you can use to simulate the result of a mutation and update the UI even before receiving a response from the server. See, that's what I said. Can I say that? Okay. And it's very easy to actually implement optimistic UI as well. I can maybe just give you a quick brief, but first of all, we need to see how we can make call to these mutations and everything. But we'll come back. But overall, this is what optimistic UI is. Is the concept making sense, guys? Say yes or no in the chat. It's a very important concept as far as front end patterns goes. It's a very important front end design pattern that you use something like optimistic UI. Any questions from anyone? No questions? सबको समझ में आ रहा है? हाँ? So in that case, now let's start building the UI. Now to build the UI, first of all, I'll create a new folder, and let's say I will call it as GraphQL. Okay. Inside this GraphQL folder, I'll create a new file, and let's say I will call it as mutations. Okay. Mutations.ts. Okay. First things first that we want to do is I'll say import GraphQL query language from Apollo client. Okay. So we are going to prepare a GraphQL query language, right? Now, just like from this GraphQL, you can say sandbox environment, we were making queries and mutation. Similar kind of a query we have to write here as well. Okay. Cool. Now, let's define our first query to add a to-do. Very simple one. So I'll say export const add to-do. This is going to be a GraphQL query language part. Okay. Now, how do you create a mutation? You use the keyword mutation. So you have a predefined type mutation. So you say mutation. Okay, mutation. And then what you can actually do is you can give the name of the mutation. Let's say adding to-dos or adding some to-dos. I'll call it as adding to-dos. Okay, that's the name of the mutation that you can give. And then you can say here, what is the mutation method on the server side? What is the mutation method? The mutation method is add to-do. So let's add that mutation method. So for a couple of mutation, you first give the mutation name, and then inside it you give the method. Okay, you give the corresponding method altogether, right? Cool. And now let's say the first parameter of add to do's is title. My bad. Title. Okay. And the second parameter is tags. The second parameter is tags. Okay. Now, very interestingly, if you see the documentation of Apollo client, okay, and if I come to, let's say, Apollo client React, okay, if I come up here and you can see we are creating a, you can see here. See, this is this is how you actually write your GraphQL queries on the client side. Okay, this is how you write your GraphQL queries on the client side. Now, if you carefully see, right, what is this dollar limit everywhere or dollar title, right? What is this on the client side? Because if you see your, if you go back here, here we do not use any dollar or anything. We are just passing the values directly, right? So in GraphQL query languages, in GraphQL query language, this dollar technically represents a variable. It's kind of like a variable that you want to put in the GraphQL query language. Are you able to get this point? Okay, that's how you put a variable. So from anywhere, if you want to call these functions and pass a couple of variables, so you prepend them with a dollar. You actually prepend them with a corresponding dollar altogether. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so here, while we are saying adding to do's, we have to make a couple of changes. Okay, what changes you guys think we should do? Anyone? What changes we should technically do here? Anybody? Anyone? What changes we should do here, guys? Changes in which sense? Like now I want to expect some, like accept some variables here. What should be the changes that I should do inside this mutation query? That's my question. Very good. Anybody else? We should technically add some dollars to the params. That's correct. Anyone else who wants to pitch in? How should we introduce some variables here? I just showed you the documentation, right? That you use dollars here. So how we should technically implement this here? Anybody? Guys, it should be simple, right? I just told you. Let's see who is actually listening. So what you can actually do is, in order to add variables, first of all, this mutation method is going to expect a variable. So what should be the variable? One variable should be title. And what should be the type? String. And one variable should be tags. And what should be the type? Array of string, which is non-nullable as well, right? And then inside the method add to do, for the title, if you see from my query interface, I was directly hard coding the title, but now I will not hard code the title. Instead, this is the variable title, which is going to be passed by the user. And I'm going to use the variable title here and use the variable tags here. This is how you actually define a mutation. This is how you actually define a mutation. And then you are going to define what do you want in return. We need an ID, we need title, and we need, let's say, completed. That's it. We don't need tags for now. This is what I want in return. And that's how you have defined your first mutation altogether, right? That's how you define your first mutation altogether. Make sense, guys? This is the first mutation that we have defined on the client side. Can I say that? This is the first mutation that we have defined for the client side. Yes or no, everybody? Say yes or no in the chat. Any questions? So you can say that, just to revise, just to make you guys revise, you can say that we are defining a mutation query that we are going to hit from the React front end, just like how this query is hitting from this query console. Now, this mutation query, first of all, is going to define a method adding to-dos. This method from the users, like we are going to pass a title and a tags. Title will be of type string, tag will be of type array of string. So this dollar represents a variable, or you can say it's kind of like going to store a value here. So when we will call this method, we are going to pass title and tags. So this variable I can pass here while calling this mutation, because if you see, when we were calling this mutation in the title property, we were hard coding to do two. We were hard coding the tags. Now you don't need to hard code it. This method is going to take the title and we are going to pass the title in the title property and tags in the tags property. You can change the name here. You can change the name to ABC and this is going to become ABC. Just like how you call methods, in a similar way, we are calling mutations and queries here as well. Make sense, guys? Any questions? Now I would like to stop here and wait for if you guys have any questions altogether. Anybody having any questions, say a yes or no in the chat. There are some really interesting features, and I believe in React 19, what they have actually done is they have removed some really hard parts of React. Like now, even if you don't understand how use memo and use callbacks and everything were working, you are still a good React developer now. So I'm thinking to make a dedicated video on what are the new changes in React 19. But yeah, it has brought some really nice changes. I went through a couple of them as well. It's good. I believe it's good. Do you think use ref will be removed in future? Just like I believe they can make significant changes, because what I've seen is that after React 17 and anything, like mostly like 17, they are introducing like very frequent changes. I am assuming that there can be some more changes. I can't comment on refs, but I'm not sure. Like I can't comment on that. But I believe there will be some significant changes. I am also like going through what are all the total number of changes in React 19. I'm yet to like go through all of them, but yeah, whatever I read were like pretty significant altogether. Make sense? Any questions? Anyone as of now? Any questions? Anyone? Why don't you like PHP? It's not like I don't like PHP. I have never worked with PHP, first of all. Second of all, I don't find it very friendly. Third of all, I don't see like too many use cases of PHP now. And I believe there are far better technologies to learn. Like, for example, if I have to take a bet, like I would like to spend a lot of time in exploring things like Go or maybe exploring things like Rust rather than spending a lot of time in something like PHP. So, yeah, that's like, it's kind of like a opinion kind of thing. I don't hate it. Like I used to hate Java a lot. I don't think I used to hate PHP that much that I used to hate Java, but now I have kind of like in a good agreement with Java. That's what you can say. Anybody else having any questions? If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. No problem. नो क्वेश्चंस गाइस, किसी का कोई सवाल नहीं है? Shall we start using this mutation? Shall we like start using these mutations, guys? शुरू करें यूज करना. Is Mern gonna be oversaturated soon? I don't think so. Uh, I believe there are a lot of people going in Mern. I believe the quality of developers are still very less. Like, matlab, you will find a lot of people still writing code in controllers. You'll find a lot of courses still teaching writing code in controllers. अभी लोग कंट्रोलर से ही बाहर नहीं आ पा रहे, उनको पता ही नहीं कंट्रोलर में क्या होता है. People are not able to understand that there are far better things than Express now. Like look at Nest, look at Fastify, look at Next now. So it's not like Mern, but concept of Mern like will be used in the later part. But I believe people are shifting to other tech very fast. Like Next.js is something that people are opting very fast, I would say. So yeah. Okay, cool. Let's start. So now we have defined a mutation. We have defined a mutation very easily, like a simple mutation we have actually defined. Okay. Now what we are going to do is, let's go to our new folder. I'll call a new folder as, let's say, components. Inside components, let's say I'll create a new file, todo.tsx. Okay. And let's say I'll say const todo, which is of type react dot functional component. Okay. Okay. And let's do one thing. Let's say export default to do. Cool. And from here, I'm going to say return inside a fragment. Inside a fragment, just a second. I'll say a to do. Okay, save it. Let's go to app.tsx and let's use the to do component on. Save it. Let's see if the server is running fine. Yes, the server is running fine. Let's go back and you can see we are getting a GraphQL to do here. If you zoom in, you can see this is the to do coming up. Looks good. Now let's try to shape up this component. Okay, let's try to shape up this component. Now before we start using GraphQL anywhere in our application, what we have to actually do is we have to first of all make our GraphQL client here, this Apollo client, accessible throughout the application. So for that, Apollo gives us the provider in React. So if you go to app.tsx, sorry, index.tsx, here you can use something called as Apollo provider. Okay, Apollo provider, and I'll wrap my app component inside Apollo provider. Okay, and this Apollo provider has a property called as client, in which we can pass our client object from our Apollo client. So this is our Apollo client object, and you can see I have wrapped my app component with the Apollo provider. Now what's going to happen is this client is going to be accessible throughout our React app, and we can use it according to our use cases altogether. So that's going to be interesting. Now let's do one thing. Let's come back to our todo.tsx. Okay. Now I'll create like a single component. I'm not going to make too many components just to make things simple. I'll say const title comma set title is equals to use state. Okay, I'll keep a title state because I'm going to create a form eventually. I'll say const tags comma set tags is equals to use state. Okay, and let's say this is going to be empty for now. Okay, this is good. Now what Apollo client gives you is Apollo client gives you a hook. And what is the name of the hook? There are two major hooks. One is called as use query and one is called as use mutation. If you have to define a query, then you can use the use query hook. And if you have to define a mutation, then you can use the use mutation hook. So for example, you can say const add to do is equals to use mutation. You can see there is a use mutation hook. Inside the use mutation hook, what you have to do is you have to pass your mutation GQL, that is add to do from here, and pass it here. And then it takes a configuration object as well. It takes a configuration object as well. Okay. Let's import this add to do from here. Okay. Now, this is where the power of optimistic UI is going to come into the picture. Okay. So what you can do inside this options object is that you can define two properties. One is optimistic response and one property is update. What is optimistic response? What is optimistic response? In optimistic response, what will happen is when you will call this mutation, whatever you have inside this optimistic response, what it will do is it will immediately update the UI based on this optimistic response and parallelly make the API call to the GraphQL server. And when the response comes back, then it will use this update parameter to update the UI corresponding to that. So that's going to be a super interesting thing to actually do, to actually see optimistic UI kind of like working end to end here. Okay, so let's do that. So what's the optimistic response that we expect? Okay, so if you carefully remember, inside this mutation, we expect this kind of a response. We expect kind of like this kind of a response, right? Where we have, let's say, this data, get to dos, and like all of these things. And when you try to add a mutation, for example, if you create a to do 3, send it. This is the type of mutation you technically kind of like expect, right? Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to have a similar kind of a response. So we are going to say that the optimistic response that at least we expect is, if you see, first of all, mutation name, that is add to do. So I'll say add to do, and there will be an ID. So now it's an optimistic UI. That means the backend has not been updated yet. So backend call is parallelly going. So we do not have a very substantial ID as of now. So what I will do is I can create a new UUID kind of a thing. So there is a package called as UUID. Okay, UUID npm. It's kind of like universal unique identifier. You can install UUID, and I can show you UUID in React with TS. Okay. You can see you have to first of all install UUID, copy, stop the server, paste it, restart the server. Okay. Then what you have to do is you have to import UUID like this. So there is a method called as UUID v4. Okay. So I'll import UUID v4 as v4. Okay. And you can see you can create UUID like this. So I'll copy this and I will say ID is something like this. Make sense? Okay. And let's see. Okay, we don't have types, I guess, for UUID. So I guess you need to install the types as well. So you can see we can install the types like this. Copy, paste, turn up the server, and you can see now UUID is coming up. So the ID, so we will expect that the ID that is going to come up is kind of like a UUID v4. Later we are going to, of course, update it. Okay. The title we will expect as the title state only. Okay. And completed we will expect as, let's say, false. And tags we will expect as tags coming from here. So this is a string of tags, right? So what you can do is you can say tags dot split. We can split it based on comma. Okay. And then we can say dot map. We can say a dot map tag to tag dot trim. Okay. So we can just trim any extra spaces and everything coming up. So this is what our optimistic response is going to look like. That, okay, whenever we are going to like call the add to do, this server interaction is going to take up some time. So what we are going to do is we are going to expect an optimistic UI that, okay, immediately we will update the UI and later whatever comes from the server, based on that we can do something. Okay. So that's how you implement optimistic UI using this optimistic response. Okay. And then And then you have this update. Technically, you have this update. What goes inside update? What goes inside update is, inside update, you actually mention that once the GraphQL call is done, what should happen next, right? When the mutation completes on the server side, what should happen next? That is what is going to happen here. Okay. Now, this update is actually going to be a callback method. Okay. If you carefully see, optimistic response is just an immediate response, but update is a callback method. That what we should do once the update has been done. Okay. Now, this callback method takes a cache instance that is going to your Apollo cache. Can you see? The first parameter is your Apollo cache. And the second parameter, is technically your data in the form of add to do, right? See, this is what the mutation looks like, right? Data in the form of add to do. And in fact, we should change that here as well, because eventually we are going to get a, first of all, a data, and inside that we are going to get an add to do. Okay, this is what you have to technically keep in mind. Or, oh, sorry, we already had that. Sorry, this object we already had. No, so this is cool. So you can see the update callback gives you the cache instance, that is your Apollo client cache, and the second parameter is going to be the eventual response that we are going to get. So this is the whole response that we are getting, right? So from that response, I destructure data and then add to do, right? So this should also be wrapped in the form of an object. Okay, cool. And let's do one thing for now. Let's say I'll say print console.log add to do. That's it. That's all that we are going to print. Okay, let's print add to do. Nothing more, nothing less. This is the bare minimum simple thing that I'm going to do. That is, I'm going to print add to do. Okay, cool. And then let's see later what we can actually do with this particular object. So this is working good for us. This is looking nice to us. Okay, now let's prepare the UI. Let's prepare the UI as well. So now here, what we can do is we can have a div. Okay, inside this div, I can have an h1 GraphQL powered to do app. Okay, GraphQL powered to do. Okay, I'll create a form. I don't need an action. Inside this form, I'll give an input. Okay, this is of type text. Okay, and the value is going to be your title. Placeholder is going to be your title, and on change, what we are going to do is we are going to take the event object and we will say set title as e.target.value. That's it. That's our input tag. So I'll keep it like this here. Press enter here, and press enter. Looks good. So this is our input for the title. Okay, and then similar to this, we'll be having an input for our tag. Very plain basic UI implementation I'm doing. I'll be having one more input, this time for tags. You can say put comma separated tags and e.target.value. Make sense? This looks good. This looks good to me. Okay, this is good. And then what we can have is we can have a button add to do. We can have a button add to do, which is of type submit. Okay, now inside this form, let's do one thing. Inside this form, I'm going to add a on submit, right? There's a on submit that I can add, and I'll say handle add to do. I'll write a method handle add to do. Copy this and let's write a function handle add to do. Got it, guys? Very simple. Okay, and now inside this handle add to do, we are going to get a event object, right? This is of type react.form event. First thing that we are going to do is e.target.value. prevent default. Okay. And now this use mutation gives us this add to do property. This is nothing but a function. So you can call this function and you can pass an object which expects a variables parameter. And here you can pass your variables. Okay. So the first variable that we are going to pass is title. And the second variable that we are going to pass in the form of tags is going to be this. This one. Copy, paste. Okay. So comma separated tags, we are going to just trim them and make comma separated array. That's it. Okay. So this is what we are going to do. Save it. And okay, so there is one error coming up. Let's zoom out. Cannot access add to do before initialization. Just a second. So we have add to do coming up. Okay, let me see if I missed something. So I have add to do going on. I have add to do going on. This looks good. Okay. And okay, my bad. Here, what you have to do is no, but this is already done, right? This we have already done. Let's see if we are missing something. So we have add to do. This looks good. Okay. And oh, now it's working. Once again, now the UI came up, right? There is one colon expected. Once again, expected name found colon. Once again, where is this error coming up? Let's restart the server once. Inspect network all. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Did we do something? This is good. And inside mutations, this is a adding to do's mutation. Adding to do's. We call this mutation with the variables. This is good. Okay. Let's see. Can we also change this default response we get from the server, that is data that was something? You can update things accordingly. Let's see. Did we forgot await somewhere? I don't think on the front end side we need it anywhere as of now. Why there is a colon coming up? Where is this colon coming up? Let's see. You're going to tease this in new batch from beginning? Yes, Tushar, we are going to do that as well. Okay. Let's see. It says a GraphQL error. Expected this, found this. Let's Google this error once. Oh, there is some issue in the GQL syntax. One second. Okay, some curly braces is not closed properly. Let's see. This is all good here. Did we make some changes? Completed. Save. So cancel. Save. And looks like there is some issue with the mutation. Let's see. So we have an add to do. This is good. We have come back. We have an add to do. This is good. Okay. Oh, 1 second. I believe if I go back, oh yeah, this is same spelling. This is good. Add to do. So I call add to do. I put the title, $title, tags, $tags. Let's see. This is the argument. Yep, tags and title. This is the argument. In the response, we expect ID title completed. This is good. Okay. We do dollar tags. Okay, what's the expectation here? We have a string here. Okay, my bad. This should be, I guess, a non-nullable string. Save it. And okay, still the same issue. Hmm. Expected a name. One second. If I remove this mutation altogether, or sorry, let's make it an empty GQL. One second. Save it. So now it doesn't read anything. Okay, let's come back. Now let me remove this add to do for now. Expected a curly brace. Found name, found curly brace. Okay. And if I bring this one back, somewhere it is expecting a colon. Missing something. It should be GQL. Once again. No, I don't think it should be that. Second. I don't think we need to, because here also, like whatever you write here, same mutation works. Like if I copy this for a moment and bring this one here, paste, save it. Now you can see it's working, right? You can see it's working. So let's do one thing. Let's go back and let's try this in the query console. Here we can find the errors much faster, I believe. Paste it. Okay. So this dollar title is somehow throwing an error. Oh, you can see there is a colon that I have mentioned here. My bad. See, there is a colon here. This is the colon it was querying for, and you can see refresh. Make sense, everyone? So the issue was that there was a colon that I by mistake mentioned here. This is not expected. Sorry, this colon is not expected here. Save it, and you can see the server is working up and fine running. Okay. Now let's try to see something. Let's see. Let's add a title. Let's say I'll say to do one, or let's say to do one from client, and tag is, let's say, 1, 2. Oh, sorry, my bad. And one more thing I guess I have done as a mistake is in the todo.tsx, you can see this is tags. I should say set tags, right? This should be set tags. This should be set tags. Save it. Now, client to do 1, 2. And if I click on add to do, now can you see it is making a GraphQL call? Can you see it made a GraphQL call? See? And what's the response? This is the response. So it has created a brand new object, right? And we can check that on the backend as well. If I go here and if I just refresh, there should be some refresh. And you can see client to do one is actually coming up. Isn't this super cool? And it was very easy, right? It was very easy. All you did is you defined a mutation here. You went to todo.tsx. You use the hook use mutation, mention your GraphQL query syntax, and in the response, you mention an optimistic response and an update response. Optimistic response is the response that you immediately going to give, and update response is the one that comes after the server interaction is done. If you see the console, can you see this is the response that you are getting? Okay, if I clear up everything and if I click on add to do again, okay, and let's do one thing. Update function. Okay, so that we know it's putting it here. Click on add to do. And can you see this update function, first of all, is giving you this. This is what? This is a UUID. Can you see? And when the response comes back, this is the response from the server. Can I see that? Okay. So this update function is getting called. This update function is getting called when you immediately return an optimistic response, and then when the server response also comes back. And I can show you that once more. if I clear it up and add to do again, the first log is for your optimistic response. And how I'm able to figure that out? If you look at this ID, this is a UUID. Can I say that? Okay. And the second one is the server response. How I'm able to figure that out? Because this is a MongoDB ID. And apart from that, you also get a underscore type name. That's the interesting part. Can I say that? Okay. So this is how you can actually manage things. Okay. Now, can you see you have access to this cache object? You have access to this cache object. If I say console.log cache, console.log cache. Now this is an interesting thing. If I add the to do again, can you see this is of type in memory cache? This is of type in memory cache, right? And inside this in memory cache, if you carefully see, for example, let's say we go for data, right? Or let's do one thing. Prototype Apollo cache. And if I go here, can you see there is a write method? Can you see there is a write method? Okay, and there is a read method as well. Okay, so what you can do is you can say that cache dot write query. So there is something called as write query. Okay, cache dot write query, and inside the argument of cache dot write query, you can pass an object, and then you can define a query. That which query you are actually going to call for, right? Which query you are actually going to call for. Okay. Now, what can be a query? A query can be something like get to do's. Remember, we have a query here. Get to do's. Can I say that? Okay. We have a query like get to do's. So, what you can say is just make a call to this query and fill the cache. Make the call to this query and fill the cache. Or you can just say cache dot write. Okay, you can just say cache dot write, and then you can start writing in the cache. Can you see? This is going to expect a write options altogether. So there are two ways in which you can write this cache. One way is you can directly write this cache, or once you have made the to-dos, then you can make a query. Instead of mutation, you can make a query. Which query? Get to-dos query, and get all the to-dos coming up from here, right? So as simple as that. So any of the two ways you can actually pick up. Make sense? Is this point making sense, guys? Hi sir, क्या build कर रहे हो? We are making a to-do app with GraphQL. So we do two requests or only one? We've made one request only. Abhishek, if you see the console, network clear, add to do. Can you see this 200? This is a pre-flight. This 200 request, this is just one single request. Why update is coming twice? Because you are technically updating your data twice. One with an optimistic response and one with an actual response. This is your optimistic response. This is your optimistic response. Can I say that? Anybody else having any questions? भैया मैं एक वेबसाइट बनाना चाहता हूँ जहाँ यूआई कंपोनेंट मटेरियल यूआई साइड सीडीएन की तरफ पर समझ नहीं आ रहा, एडमिन पैनल कैसे बनाऊं ताकि बाद में न्यू कंपोनेंट्स ऐड कर सकूं डायनेमिकली. मतलब क्या कंपोनेंट ऐड करने हैं, किस चीज का डैशबोर्ड है? कैन यू गिव सम मोर कॉन्टेक्स्ट? ठीक लग रहा है? ठीक है, चलो. So I can actually show you the cache object altogether in the docs. Okay. Cache in Apollo client. Okay. Caching in Apollo client. So you can see how Apollo client works is Apollo client makes a call to the in-memory cache. If the data is not in the in-memory cache, then it makes a call to the GraphQL server. Then the GraphQL server gives the response back. It updates the cache and sends the response back to the client. Okay. And each later time, your app executes getbook for the same object the flow looks like this. If now the memory cache already has the book, it fetches the book directly here. Server is never queried. Okay. So you can actually see if I come up here and if I say cache dot write, okay, if I come up here, let's see if they have given any examples. Example, this is your query, GraphQL query, and this is the response. One second. You can see this is the APIs. Read query, write query, update query. It uses standard GraphQL queries for managing both remote and local data. Then you can use something like fragments. What is a fragment? For example, let's say with each GraphQL query, what you are doing here is, if you go to the mutation, we are just querying for ID, title, and completed. Can I say that? We can also query for tags, for example. Now, let's say instead of writing them manually, what you can do it, you can define a custom type where you can say that, okay, I need the properties of a custom type, and that custom type is technically your fragment. Okay. So you can say you can do read fragment, write fragment, update fragment, use fragment. So it will start doing things from the fragment, or you can say cache.modify to manually update things. So we'll use cache query, right? Cache.write query or read query altogether. Make sense? Let's try to do that and see what kind of a response we can actually get. So let's see. I'll write one more mutation. Instead of mutation, let's say I'll make a new file, query.ts. So I'll write all the queries here. The syntax is very much similar. So I'll copy, paste. And what is our query? What is our query? It's get to do's. Can I say that? The query that we are looking at is get to do's. If you see on the backend on our type def, this is your get to do's query. Can I say that? So let's do that. So I'll say get to do's. It's just a variable get to do's. Okay. And what should be the GQL looking like? Now you do not need a mutation. All you need is a query. What is the query? Let's say get to do's. It doesn't expect any argument. So just by default, I'll say, what's the function name? Get to do's. Okay. The function name is get to do's. And let's say I need the ID, title, completed, and tags. As simple as that. This is your get to do's. This is your simple get to do's altogether. Okay. And now inside your component, there is one more hook that you can define. What is that hook? This hook is use query. Use query. Okay. And here you define get to do's. You just give the query. Now what it will do is it will automatically query this. It is going to automatically query this, right? Get to do's method. As simple as that. It's a very straightforward method that you can like directly use whenever you want. Okay. So for now, I'll comment it out and we'll come to the cache. We'll come to the cache here. So now, first of all, I'll say const existing to do's is equals to cache dot. Now, if you want to separately make a query call from the cache, I'll say read query, right? Let's say read query. I guess the method name is read query, right? Yeah, read query, cache dot read query. Okay, and here you can pass an object where you will say query as get to do, because this is your query in the form of GraphQL query language. And I'll say console.log existing to do's, and let's print existing to do's. Existing to do. Save it. And if you go here, refresh, console is clear. Let's add a to do, new, and let's say new here. If I click on add to do, can you see existing to do's is coming as null? Existing to do's is coming as null. Why? Because we never write any to do's in the query. Cache. We are just reading from the cache, but we never wrote anything in the cache. So let's do one thing. I'll say cache dot write query. Okay, I'll say that at any point of time, if somebody makes a call to the query get to do's, what you're going to return is you are going to return the data. You are going to return the data in this particular form. So let's see how our get to do's gives us the data. Let's go to the sandbox and fetch. Let's see how does this gives the data. It gives the data in this particular format. Okay, data and get to do's. Okay, so I'll say data. Here we will be having get to do's, and inside that, I will say existing to do's dot, let's say to do's, comma add to do. Okay. So now this is what we are going to say here. What is this add to do? This is the response that we are going to get when the update function is going to be called after the server response. This is the response when like this update function is called twice. One with the optimistic response, then the add to do is going to have this property, and later with the server response, when add to do is going to have the response from the server side. Can I say that? Okay. So now let's do one thing, and let's not even add this part. Let's say our get to do's looks something like this. Okay, and we will say get to do's. Okay, and this should be an array of add to do. Save it. If I click on new add to do, okay, let's see the update function, write query. Let's now make one more query, new to do. And now can you see when I made the second query, I already have the data of the first query inside my to do. Can I say that? This data is already coming up. So this is your existing to do's. Can I say that? So I'll say, let's do one thing. I'll say existing to do's dot add to do, or I should say, yeah, and then add to do here. Okay. Let's destructure it. Existing to do's. Okay. Let's see why this is throwing an error. This is of type unknown. Let's see. We can define the type here maybe. Cache dot read query. So let's see. Let's define the type. So this should be of type get to do's, which is coming up here. Okay. So let's define a type. It should be of type something like this, get to do's and something like this, right? So let's try to resolve it. Let me take up some question. श्योर स्वास्तिक, हम लोगों ने ऑलरेडी जो हमारे पास गुडरीड्स क्लोन है, दिस वाज अ क्वेरी दैट केम अप, जो गुडरीड्स क्लोन है उसके बैकएंड के सेटअप के डॉक्यूमेंटेशन मैंने ऑलरेडी डाल दिए. अगर तुम्हें सीआरएम वाले प्रोजेक्ट में भी प्रॉब्लम आ रही है तो आई विल ऐड अ बैकएंड डॉक्यूमेंटेशन फॉर दैट कि तुम किस तरीके से सीआरएम प्रोजेक्ट का बैकएंड भी सेटअप कर सकते हो. ठीक है, तो आई वुड हाईली रिकमेंड तुम एक बार गुडरीड्स वाले का बैकएंड सेटअप करके देखो. सिमिलर प्रोसेस तुम्हारा सीआरएम के बैकएंड का भी. अगर नहीं होता है तो आई विल ऐड एन इंस्ट्रक्शन. अगर इंस्ट्रक्शन से भी तुम्हें हेल्प नहीं होती है तो आई विल ऐड अ लेक्चर. ठीक है, अब जनरली देखो फ्रंट एंड में क्या होता है ना, आई टेल यू व्हाट हैपेंस इन द फ्रंट एंड इज, अगर तुम कहीं पे भी एज अ फ्रंट एंड डेवलपर काम करोगे ना तो तुम्हें बस एपीआई का सिग्नेचर मिलेगा दैट व्हाट एपीआई इज एक्सपेक्टेड, राइट. तुम्हें बस एपीआई का सिग्नेचर मिल रहा होगा कि अच्छा ये एपीआई एक्सपेक्टेड है, इसका ये रिक्वेस्ट है, ये रिस्पॉन्स है. तुम बैकएंड लिख नहीं रहे हो. आर एबल टू गेट दिस पॉइंट? तुम बैकएंड लिख नहीं रहे हो. अगर तुम फुल स्टैक इंजीनियर की तरह काम करते हो तो तुम जाके फिर बैकएंड लिख रहे हो. उस केस में तुम्हें पता होगा कि अच्छा बैकएंड का कौन सा कोड कहां लिखा हुआ. इसीलिए एज अ फ्रंट एंड इंजीनियर तुम्हें ये चीज आनी चाहिए कि तुम बैकएंड की ना एपीआईज पढ़ो. बात समझ में आ रही है? ऑल्सो स्वास्तिक, जस्ट एफआईआर, अपनी ईमेल से एक्सेस करो कोर्स तो ज्यादा बेटर रहेगा. 6 लोग मिलकर एक्सेस करते हो तो वैसे भी प्रॉब्लम होगी तुम्हें. सेंस? तो पहले एक अपनी ईमेल से ले लो, उसके बाद एक्सेस करो. दैट चलो. गॉट इट? फैजान डिपेंड्स, अगर तुम्हें बैकएंड सीखना है तो बैकएंड, फुल स्टैक सीखना है तो फुल स्टैक। गॉट इट? ठीक लग रहा है? चलो, now you can see we have a problem here that this existing to do's is having a type problem. So let's create one more folder of types. ठीक है, 1 second, there is some issue with my system, just give me a moment. Please give resources about how create association between different databases or different microservices. देखो, जो associations बनती है ना, मतलब तुम ये ऐसा नहीं कर पाओगे कि जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल डेटाबेस D1 है, उसमें एक टेबल है F1 और टेबल है T1, और डेटाबेस D2 है, उसमें टेबल है T2, और तुम T1 और T2 में डायरेक्टली डेटाबेस से रिलेशनशिप्स नहीं लगा पाओगे, तुम्हें लॉजिकल लेयर से रिलेशनशिप लगानी पड़ेगी। तो तुम कैसे लॉजिकल लेयर से कर पाओगे? जैसे T2 की जो प्राइमरी की है, फॉर एग्जांपल T2 तुम्हारी यूजर टेबल है और T1 तुम्हारी टू डूज टेबल है, ठीक है? तो तुम क्या करोगे, टू डूज टेबल में एक यूजर आईडी कॉलम रखोगे, वो यूजर आईडी कॉलम में सारे यूजर्स के आईडीज आएंगे आदित्य, बट उसको फिल तुम प्रोग्रामेटिकली कर रहे हो। एबल टू गेट दिस पॉइंट? फैसिलिटीज, मैंने तुम्हारा क्वेश्चन ऑलरेडी पढ़ लिया है, बट तुमने अगेन डिटेल नहीं दिया। तुमने कहा कि नैप बार चाहिए, बटन चाहिए, मैं पूछ रहा हूँ कि डैशबोर्ड किस टाइप का चाहिए? अभिषेक कह रहे हैं गुड रीड में सीड फाइल भी इंक्लूड कर दिया। नहीं, सीड फाइल मैंने इंक्लूड नहीं करी है। आई एम एक्सपेक्टिंग यू गाइस टू क्रिएट द सीड योरसेल्फ। अगर वो भी चाहिए तो बता दो, मैं करूँ। बात समझ में आ रही? एनीबॉडी एल्स हैविंग एनी क्वेश्चंस? सिस्टम काफी स्लो है, सिस्टम क्यों स्लो हो रहा है? इसकी सेकंड, बहुत हैवी फाइल डाउनलोड हो गई है क्या? ये हटा सकते हैं। कैनल ने पीआर रेज कर दिया है, बाय द वे इंप्लीमेंट बैकएंड यूजिंग हिज सीड। अच्छा, उसने बैकएंड वाले प्रोजेक्ट पे पीआर रेज करी है, फ्रंट एंड बैकएंड वाले पे करी है? अच्छा, तो मैं उसको आज मर्ज करूंगा, ठीक है? चलो, मतलब देखो, जिसको पढ़ लेना होता है ना, मैं तुम्हें बता रहा हूँ, जिसको सही तरीके से चीजें सीखनी होती है वो सीख रहे, ठीक है? जिन्होंने कोर्स ही 20 बच्चों ने एक साथ ले रखा है, 10,000 साल में वो एक लेक्चर पढ़ते हैं, किसी भी ऑर्डर में पढ़ते हैं, उनको कुछ नहीं सकता। मैं इतना बॉदर नहीं करता, बट ठीक है, किसी को प्रॉब्लम जेन्युइन, जिसकी मुझे प्रॉब्लम लगी उसके लिए मैंने डाल दिया। Cool. Coming back. So now let's do one thing. Let's do one thing. Let's define a type here. So let's create a new folder, types. Okay. And let's create a new file and let's call it as todo.ts. Okay. And let's define a couple of types. So I'll say export interface to do. Every to do is going to have a string. Then it is going to have a title, which is of type string again. Then it is going to have completed of type boolean, and tags, which is of type string array. ठीक लग रहा है? चलो, and we'll say interface get to do's data. Okay, this get to do's data is going to get us a to do's of array of to do's. Okay, array of to do's. So this is the type that we are going to have. This is the type that we are going to have. Okay, and technically this should be add to do. This should be add to do. Save it, and now this one cache.read query, this is always going to be of type this one. Let's export this interface as well. Export get to do's data, get to do's data, and import. Save it. Okay. And let's do one thing. Let's do one thing. Okay. Existing to do's, right? Cache.read query, existing to do's. And if this is coming up as null, then we are going to put an empty array. Okay. And let's do one more thing. Let's do one more thing. Okay. This is going to add the property of add to do. Do we need to have add to do? Yes, we do need to have add to do. So let's say this is going to be an object of add to do, which is an empty array. Let's save it. Now things should work. Now let's come to the database. Let's clear everything from our database. Okay. Let's clear this to-dos collection. Paste it, drop. Now let's start making new to-dos. Okay. So I'll refresh. I'll set to-do 1. I'll say homework, comma, grocery. And I'll click on add to do. You can see this has technically added a to do. Let's check if I refresh. To dos. And you can see this has added a to do. And can you see now it's kind of like writing to the cache. How can we check that? If I click on to do 2 and click on add to do now, let's see. This has failed. Let's see what is coming up. Existing to do dot add to do is not iterable. Let us see what is there. Add to do. Let's see what's the log is. Add to do. Add to do. Somewhere we are not defining the types properly. Let's check. This was having get to do's. My bad. This should be get to do's. Get to do's. Copy. Okay. And this should be get to do's. Get to do's. Save it. And now if I click on add to do, now you can see it is working. Add to do again, it is working again. I can see it's properly adding the to do's to the cache. Okay. And when you will start reading it, it will also read the to do's from the cache only. As simple as that. Okay. So how can you read the to do's? How can you read the to do's? You have your query here. Get to do's query. Can I say that? We have this simple query coming up. So what I can do is I can now use this use query hook. The use query hook gives us a data property. It also gives us a loading and an error property, that in case things are still loading or things have actually went to an error, anything like that. So you can actually use these, but I'm just going to use the data property. And I will say here, for example, below the form, I will say inside a UL tag, I'll say data dot get to do's, right? Get to do's dot map. Okay, we'll go to each individual to do. And for now, I will say, let's say I'll get an li tag. Okay. The data of the li tag is going to be to do dot title. To do dot title. And then the key here is going to be to do dot id. Make sense? And this to do is going to be of type to do here. Okay. Let's do one thing, save it, and this is of let's do one thing. Let's see. Let's see. We'll bring back the key in a moment. Let's see if this much part is working. Let's refresh. Okay, and let's see what happened here. Okay, it says duplicate declaration to do. My bad. Is the to do already declared here somewhere? Oh yeah, my bad. So let's call it as I to do. Let's call it as I to do here. Let's call this one as I to do here. And let's make this one as I to do here. Save it. Otherwise, there will be a repeated declaration. I to do. Save it. Okay. And okay, let's do one thing. Let's see what the data is looking like. Okay. Let's see. Let's have a use effect. Let's have a use effect here. And I'll say console.log data, save it. Let's remove this much for now. Let's see what we are reading from the data. If I refresh, okay, so this is the data that we are getting, get to dos, which is having 4 to dos here. Can you see this is from the cache? Okay, or you can see this is from the query. So data.getToDos.map. Okay, if I save it, you can see now each child should have a unique key prop. So now we can bring in the key prop, key as todo.id. Save it. And okay, one second. Let's see. Type string is this. Let's just quickly Google it. Da-da-da. Okay. Oh, we did not make a mandatory property here. Let's check. Okay, why it's not? This is again not working. My VS Code is lagging today. Exclamation mark. Save it. And let's see. Okay, just a second, guys. My VS Code is lagging. It looks like my system issue. Just give me a moment. Now it should be working. One second. Are you guys able to hear me properly? Is everyone able to hear me properly? Should I follow one thing and complete it from start to end, or should I follow market trend? Because market is so volatile. Sometimes AI/ML is on pick, sometimes blockchain. Follow one thing, I would say. डैशबोर्ड में कंपोनेंट्स के कोड डाल सकूं एंड उसके बारे में कुछ डिटेल एंड ऐड कंपोनेंट की इमेज. मैं बस डैशबोर्ड में कोड अपलोड कर सकूं कंपोनेंट्स का ताकि यूजर कॉपी कर सके. जॉब दिला सकते हो क्या? मॉन स्टैक डेवलपर हूँ, कई सारे प्रोजेक्ट भी बनाए हैं, तुम्हारी जान पहचान होगा. मेल मी एट, मैं मेरी ईमेल आईडी में से यूट्यूब चैनल से मिल जाएगी. अपना रेज्यूमे मेल कर दो. फिर तुम्हारे रेज्यूमे में सही में इनफ मीट हुआ जो तुम कह रहे हो, देन आई वुड बी हैप्पी टू रेफर यू. ठीक लग रहा है? Sir, what if we are getting API to we are getting data to front end from an API? We are getting data to front end from an API which doesn't give any primary key, but sending emails as unique identifier. In that case, should we use email as key for iterating? Ideally, you should not have that scenario. Although emails are expected to be unique properties, right? But your API signature, in that case, your backend is not properly written. What we can suggest is that your backend is not properly written. So that's why you are not having your ID property properly. That is something that I can like conclude with this particular part. Okay. नहीं मतलब मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा. तुम एक डैशबोर्ड बनाना चाह रहे हो जिसमें कंपोनेंट्स के कोड तुम डालोगे एंड उसके बारे में डिटेल डालोगे एंड कंपोनेंट की इमेज भी कर सकते हैं ताकि यूजर को कोड कॉपी करने पे अपनी वेबसाइट में ऐड कर सके. मतलब मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा. तुम डैशबोर्ड में क्या चाहते हो कि तुम डैशबोर्ड में कोड डाल पाओ, कोड अपने आप से उसका कंपोनेंट बना दो. इज दैट व्हाट यू आर आस्किंग? मतलब कोई भी आके अपना कोई भी फ्रंट एंड कंपोनेंट लिखे और उसका कोड बन जाए, ऐसा चाह रहे हो क्या? Sorry if I am not able to get your query properly. Bhavesh, yes, I'll give you a quick introduction on that if you want. मतलब मैंने शायद प्लेटफॉर्म पे नहीं लिखा होगा, बट इफ यू वांट तो हम लोग क्लास में ऐसे क्विक डिस्कस कर सकते हैं, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. ठीक है, चलो ये देख लेते हैं. अच्छा सॉरी, one second, let's remove this. Let's see what is the issue coming up. It's not taking key here. Let's see why it's not taking a key here. Our key is coming up as todo.title. Oh, my bad. I believe this data, oh sorry, this all we already defined, right? That this can never be empty. Let's see, why is this saying not defined? Da-da-da. Let's see what's the issue. Key is todo.id. What is todo.id here with us? We have to-do.id, that is good. We have a id as a string. Okay, and it says type string is not assignable to key. Oh, so we can do as key, right? One second. Come back. We can say as key. Save it. Now it's good. I guess we missed that, and it's good. Now I can see things are working. The problem was in this key prop actually expects the type of a property key object only. So I said to-do.id as key, and now you can see things are working. Right. If you refresh, let's see. Okay, my bad. Now we can have this use effect here. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading get to do's. Let's see where it is getting get to do's from. So data dot get. Oh, sorry. So you can say if the data is present, then only you read it. And now you can see things are good. You can see things are working. So I didn't put a null check here. Now I don't need this use effect. So just for logging purpose, save it. Now let's try to add a to do, new to do, and some tags I'll add. If I click on add, you can see we are able to add a to do. If you go to the network tab, now, if let's say I add a new to do one, click on add to do, you can see we are making one GraphQL call, and inside that one GraphQL call, we are getting a response back. When this response is coming back, we are updating our cache and also displaying details here. As simple as that. This is looking pretty fine and pretty cool. And you can see we have a end-to-end GraphQL app running. We also implemented our optimistic UI that initially it takes the data from the optimistic response, and later when the response comes back from the server, then it updates the data on the client side as well. So we have technically implemented a very nice design pattern of front end, that is optimistic UI, very easily using Apollo client for GraphQL. ओ अच्छा, तो तुम टेक्निकली कुछ ऐसा बनाना चाहते हो, डेजी यूआई। अगर जैसे हम जाएं, तुम डेजी यूआई पे जाके सी कंपोनेंट्स करो, अलर्ट पे क्लिक करो, तो यहाँ पे ये कंपोनेंट है, कंपोनेंट का कोड दिख जाए, ऐसा ये चाहते हो, राइट? तो दिस शुड बी वेरी सिंपल, दिस शुड बी आई बिलीव वेरी सिंपल। मतलब तुम बैकएंड में ऐसा, मतलब यहाँ पे तो तुम्हें बस रेंडरर चाहिए, राइट? तुम यहाँ पे जो भी JSX लिखोगे, राइट, ये जो भी JSX लिखोगे, इस JSX को तुम्हें यहाँ पे रेंडर करना है, राइट? इस JSX को तुम्हें यहाँ पे रेंडर करना है। तो ये भी जो भी JSX का कोड है, यू कैन एक्चुअली कीप दैट समवेयर इन योर बैकएंड डीबी। तुम अपने डेटाबेस में स्टोर करके रख सकते हो। जब भी फ्रंट एंड पे कोई भी पेज पे कॉल आएगी, उस पेज के कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग तुम्हें जो जो क्वेरीज चाहिए, तुम सब कुछ क्वेरी करके ले आओ। हर पेज को तुम इंडिविजुअली भी प्रिपेयर कर सकते हो। एंड देन यहाँ पे तुम्हारे पास वन सेकेंड, यहाँ पर तुम्हारे पास क्या होगा, काइंड ऑफ लाइक तुम कंपोनेंट रीडर यहीं पे लगा सकते हो। तो तुम एक चीज सर्च कर सकते हो, लेट्स से रेंडर रिएक्ट कंपोनेंट बाय पासिंग JSX in form, okay, or let's do it like this. We have a JSX code in the form of string, and I want to show a React component, and I want to show how a React component will look like. How to do this? One second. Okay, what's going on? Okay. Why it's not searching? Not searching. Okay. So how to convert string to JSX? Let's see. Da-da. So you can see, you can have this kind of an implementation, right? What you can do is, whatever your string is coming up, you can actually convert that string. So there is, like, you can use Babel also. There is a Babel library, I guess, babel.transform, something like this. Okay. So you can use babel.transform. So what it will do is it is going to convert your corresponding string to the React compatible, I would say, JSX, and then you can just directly render that JSX, right? So I guess there is something called as like you can make your own JSX renderer. All you have to do is make a, I would say, prop that is going to take any child component, right? Let's say तुमने एक string में एक paragraph component लिख के दे दिया या ऐसा alert लिख के दे दिया ऐसा ऐसा, ठीक है? ये JSX तुमने एज अ स्ट्रिंग रीड किया, उस स्ट्रिंग को तुम एक वैलिड JSX में पहले कन्वर्ट करो, एक स्टेट वेरिएबल में रख लो, एंड देन उस स्टेट वेरिएबल को अपने चाइल्ड प्रॉप की तरह पास कर दो एक कंपोनेंट में। तो एक प्रीव्यू कंपोनेंट बना लो। प्रीव्यू कंपोनेंट का काम कुछ भी नहीं होगा, वो बस एक चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट लेगा और उसको यहाँ पे दिखा देगा। चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट मिलेगा कैसे? तुम उसको बैबल से कन्वर्ट कर सकते हो, एक स्ट्रिंग से चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट, समथिंग दैट यू कैन डू। इस चीज को ट्राई करो, ठीक लग रहा है? Off topic question, for your office work, do you use this Mac or you have another system? No, this is my personal MacBook. This is not my office laptop. Yes, admin page बनाना होगा। admin page पे क्या होगा, बस तुम अपना JSX लिखो, उसको string के फॉर्म में डेटाबेस में स्टोर करो। सर क्या API टेस्टिंग भी होती है? जस्ट लाइक हाउ वी हैव TDD फॉर सम फ्रेमवर्क आर ऑलरेडी इन द मार्केट कोडिंग लाइक जस्ट एंड मोका। तो टेक्निकली बैकएंड इंजीनियर्स की जिम्मेदारी है कि तुम्हें प्रॉपर्ली टेस्टेड APIs दें। what they can actually do is, मतलब अगर तुमने पोस्टमैन देखा है तो what they can actually give you as a client, मतलब तुम अगर क्लाइंट टीम में हो तो वो तुम्हें क्या कर सकते हैं, अपनी पूरे पोस्टमैन की कलेक्शन दे सकते हैं और तुम उसमें टेस्टिंग करके देख सकते हो। बट उनको अपने एंड पे एक यूनिट टेस्टिंग और इंटीग्रेशन टेस्टिंग करके रखनी होती है। अभिषेक सिंह। सो गाइस, आई बिलीव कि तुम्हें समझ में आ गया होगा कि किस तरीके से तुम क्लाइंट और सर्वर साइड पे क्वेरीज और म्यूटेशंस लिख सकते हो, राइट? सर्वर साइड पे लिखना आसान है, क्लाइंट साइड पे भी तुम्हें बस GQL की फॉर्म में म्यूटेशन बनानी है और बस उसको यूज म्यूटेशन में पास कर देना है, दैट्स इट। यूज म्यूटेशन में पास कर दो। अगर तुमने क्वेरी बनाई है, लेट्स से क्वेरी बनाई है, तो उसको तुम यूज क्वेरी में पास कर दो एंड थिंग्स विल स्टार्ट वर्किंग। व्हाट प्राइस इज रिक्वायर्ड टू डिप्लॉय? देखो, अगर तुम AWS यूज कर रहे हो तो प्राइस विल डिपेंड ऑन कितना तुम्हारे, मतलब तुम ये चूज कर सकते हो कि प्राइस विल डिपेंड ऑन हाउ मच ट्रैफिक यू हैव। इनिशियली डोंट वरी टू मच अबाउट प्राइसिंग, मतलब AWS पे तुम फ्री टीयर के लिए रजिस्टर कर लो एंड तुम्हारे टेस्टिंग पार्ट तक वो चलेगा। उसके बाद जब तुम डिप्लॉय करोगे तो इफ यू हैव इनफ यूजर्स तो प्राइसिंग का उतना टेंशन रहेगा नहीं, ठीक है? चलो, सबको समझ में आ गया आई बिलीव कि हाउ थिंग्स वर्क विद GraphQL। नाउ फ्रॉम हियर यूजिंग GraphQL इज यूजिंग लाइक सम एनी REST API। बात समझ में आ रही है? Now you know that how frontend communicates with REST APIs. Now you know how frontend communicates with GraphQL APIs as well. Now you need a server which is exposing some GraphQL queries, and from the client you can use the Apollo client to actually make call to those GraphQL queries, and that's it. You will have the data and manipulate the front end however you want, whenever you want. That's it. That's the only thing that you have to do. Okay. One more interesting thing is optimistic UI. If you don't want to use optimistic UI, you can just avoid it as well. And that's GraphQL for you guys. When mean course will come, I do not have too much inclination in launching a mean course. Why? Because from a very long time, I have not worked with Angular. Google में I was working with Flutter. तो भी Angular से touch भी छूटा हुआ है और मतलब मुझे लगता है कि React is enough. मतलब मेरे साइड से yes, Abhishek. I wanted to give you guys how you can make a GraphQL server as a front-end engineer, and as a front-end engineer how you can consume a GraphQL server altogether. अब यहाँ से तुम GraphQL के बारे में और भी चीजें पढ़ सकते हो. For example, in GraphQL you have different types. Just like TypeScript में you have unions, GraphQL में भी also you have unions. In GraphQL, in the last class I showed you relationships, right? That user were having many to-dos. So those kind of relationships you can have. But more or less, this is what GraphQL is. You have mutations, you have queries, you have types. You define the types, you set up a server, You make call to mutations and queries, and that's it. One more thing that we added is the optimistic viewer design part. अब तुम इसको किसी भी मतलब एप्लीकेशन में इंक्लूड कर सकते हो. ठीक लग रहा है? Abhishek, okay. So if you want to add authentication, so what you can actually do is very simple. In the server, come here, and you can have a context property. This context property, whatever you will return with this context callback, no, इस context की callback में तुम कुछ भी जो return करोगे ना, वो तुम्हारे सारे resolvers के पास accessible हो. Are able to get my point? ये जो context property है, इसमें तुम जो कुछ भी define करोगे, और मतलब जो कुछ भी यहाँ से रिटर्न करोगे वो सारे के सारे रिजॉल्वर्स के पास एक्सेसिबल हो. ठीक है? व्हाट डज दैट ऑन मींस? कहाँ पे ऑन? कैन यू टेल मी लाइन नंबर? बात समझ में आ रही है कि ये कंटेक्स्ट क्या है? दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट विल बी एक्सेसिबल टू ऑल ऑफ योर रिजॉल्वर्स. ठीक है? अब यहाँ पे तुम क्या कर सकते हो? इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में तुम आइडियली एक चीज कर सकते हो कि अपनी रिक्वेस्ट को पिक करो और रिक्वेस्ट के हेडर्स में से ऑथ टोकन निकाल लो. आर यू एबल टू गेट माय पॉइंट? तुम अपने रिक्वेस्ट की हेडर्स में से ऑथ टोकन निकाल लो और उस ऑथ टोकन को यहां से रिटर्न करो. एज सिंपल एज दैट. दैट इज समथिंग दैट यू कैन एक्चुअली डू. बात समझ में आ रही है? सो व्हाट यू कैन डू इज, यहाँ पे तुम्हारे पास पैरामीटर में तुम्हारा रिक्वेस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट मिलेगा. ठीक है? what you can actually do is let's say you can say const token is equals to request dot headers dot authorization, right? तो तुम auth token निकाल लो, and then const user is equals to, you can write your own get user method by passing your JWT token, decipher the JWT token, and then you can just return the user object. Now what will happen is this user object that you're going to pass from here, this user object is going to be accessible in all of your corresponding, I would say, resolver methods. Make sense? ठीक लग रहा है? ठीक है? So I can show you some articles on context, how to access context in GraphQL Apollo server. If you go here, can you see you have a context here, right? And inside your resolvers, you can see the first argument, second argument is your parameter, third argument is the context value. So from here now you can access the context value. That's it. ठीक लग रहा है? और उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट को फिल करने के लिए तुम यहाँ पे रिक्वेस्ट ऑब्जेक्ट को एक्सेस कर सकते हो. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आई कैन इवन शो यू लाइक console.log request. ठीक है? Save it and let's restart our backend server. Server is up. If I go back to my client, and can you see the request object is coming up? This is the request object coming up. Incoming message. This has the whole request object. From here now you can access request.headers. Save it. Refresh. You can see all the headers are coming up. अब अगर एक बार हेडर्स का एक्सेस आ गया तो यहाँ से टोकन निकाल लो. टोकन निकाल लिया तो उसको कंटेक्स्ट वैल्यू में तुम अगर यहाँ से रिटर्न करोगे तो वो सारे के सारे रिजॉल्वर्स में एक्सेसिबल है. फॉर एग्जांपल जैसे मैं एक काम करता हूँ, मैंने करा रिटर्न एक स्ट्रिंग करी संकेत. ठीक है? एंड इफ आई गो टू माय रिजॉल्वर्स, यहाँ पे एक और वेरिएबल रखता हूँ कॉन्टेक्स्ट. ठीक है? let's say I'll say console.log context. Save it. If I restart, एक second. What is the type? Let's quickly check the type. I guess there is some context object that should be coming up. Okay, it's a string. Save it. Okay. And now if I make a call to this, like refresh, let's say hello, and click on add to do. Let's see what happens. So you can see this is printing this string. And 1 second. Can you see this is printing it in the form of this Sanket as an object? Like, so this is a context object, right? If you see here, I just returned a string. So it converted that string to a context object. But now you have this string, like if you want to return it in the form of an object, let's say name as this. Okay. And then here I can say any, for example. Save it. And now if I restart, refresh, hello, send it. Can you see we are able to access the context? तो अब तुम्हारी हेडर एक्सेस, मतलब तुम हेडर्स एक्सेस कर पा रहे हो, तुम हर रिक्वेस्ट के साथ एक वैल्यू एक्सेस कर पा रहे हो कॉन्टेक्स्ट की. सो नाउ दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट विल बी एक्सेसिबल. ठीक है. सो GraphQL इज इंटरेस्टिंग. GraphQL इज इंटरेस्टिंग. तुम जितना ज्यादा GraphQL पे कोड लिखोगे उतना ज्यादा तुम्हारी ग्रिप बनती जाएगी. बट द core structure of GraphQL is just this. Now from here you can start making a good end-to-end application and try to integrate GraphQL. ठीक है. We can take up this question offline also. One second. Let me open it up. Copy link. Paste it here. What is this on? Okay, this is for inline. I told you na that this is for fragment. Read about fragments. I told you na that if let's say from here you are returning, let's say ID, title, completed tags. If you want to define it as a custom type, let's say you want to say ID and title is my new custom type, you call that as a fragment. So read about fragments. This is for your inline fragments. Okay. So read about that. Okay. Cool. That being said, let's wrap today's session here, guys. We are going to meet soon in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye-bye. Have a great week ahead and keep putting it.